So today we're going to put in the oil pan on the top. I've got everything torqued, everything set up. I got the oil pump in there. I decided to go ahead and go with the spindle that I had instead of buying a new one. I'll post a video about my experience with trying to buy a new spindle. That did not go well. Anyway, everything's in there. It's all ready to go. I've cleaned off the edges. They're ready for dressing. The thing that you have to do on these is, you see right on here, there's kind of a little square gap, and a cork gasket goes in there, and this is what that cork gasket looks like. And when you set it in place, you'll notice it's a little longer than what it would think, right? So resist the temptation to cut that, to trim it, or do anything with that. The idea behind cork is, the idea behind cork is that it is, it works under compression. Think of a cork in a bottle, right? The idea behind keeping the wine fresh is that the cork seals it by compression. So you always want the cork to be just a little bit bigger. And when you set it in place here, you can see it sticks up a little bit here, and it sticks out a little bit here, right? And the idea is that that is going to be compressed once you torque it into place, right? So resist the temptation to trim that down. The other thing is, you want to put gasket dressing on there, and not necessarily a gasket maker or a silicone, high temp silicone or anything like that. The idea is that you want the cork to remain pliable but in place, and so a gasket dressing is the right material for that. Don't just by default use a silicone sealer. That's the right thing to use on that. All right, so why do you have a little cork piece on the end here, right? That might be the good question. This cap, this end bearing cap, is a very large, very precision machined piece, and it fits in this little group right in this little gap right in here. But there is a seam, right? I did another video a while back on putting the oil pan on the pan gasket on a 67 Mustang. And that one had a unique configuration because the oil pan gasket went over a seam that went into the timing belt, or the timing belt cover, and that had another cork gasket in between the two. So there's always a little seam in here because the crankshaft has to come in and out. So you have to be able to have a way to have a gap in there, and so there's always an engineering thing. So that's what this little gasket does, is it helps to manage this seam right in here. And so you have to put this in before you put in the gasket that goes over the top for the oil pan. So let's go ahead and put those two in. There's one on this side and there's one on the other side, and then the oil pan gasket goes over the top. So this may look like a nasty cup of coffee, but actually what they got in there is some phosphoric acid. I'm about ready to put the gasket and the oil pan onto the engine here, and first thing that I did was I looked at the nuts, and so I wanted to kind of make a comment on, when you're disassembling your car and taking it apart and getting it ready to be refurbished, as parts come off in little baggies, you keep track of where the groups of nuts and bolts go. So I have these little Ziplocs all over the place, and the idea is, keep them in little groups. So the 18 bolts that go on this gasket were in this Ziploc, and you can see they were pretty rusty by looking at the residue inside the bag there. So I dropped them in a little vat here of phosphoric acid, the same stuff that I use for treating other topical rust. And I am going to go and rinse these out with water, get the acid off of them, and then I'm going to treat them with WD to remove the water. So the acid gets rid of the rust, the water gets rid of the acid, and then the WD gets rid of the water. And then we'll be ready to use those things. So step forward to the next step here. My little acid dip. I'll go ahead and dump some of the extra out of here. I don't want to put a lot of this down the drain because it's acid, obviously. It's caustic. It's not good for the pipes or the plumbing or just city water in general. There you go. So there they are. They've been treated with that. Now they're all cleaned up. I'm going to go ahead and run them under the water and get the rest of the acid out of there. Not everybody has a vat of acid just sitting in the floor of their garage, but it's really a helpful thing to be able to just drop some stuff in there and pull it out later and rinse it off. And keep it covered and hidden away where no one's walking. You can use it over and over and over again. So there you go. Recycled bolts out of the acid wash, and they've been washed in the sink, but now they got water in them, so we don't want them to rust right back again, so we're going to throw some WD in there. WD is really great. You can even use it on electrical components. It's really great at displacing water, and it helps to make these a lot better as far as getting them to screw in. So that's enough WD for those. We'll just let them soak a little bit, get the water off the top, and then we'll dry them off. Maybe on some of those that look like they got a little bit more rust on the edges, we'll give them a little wire brush action. But you can see how clean those threads are now. They're not going to have any problems, any kind of grit going into those threads or anything that's going to prevent them from tightening down nicely without breaking. All right, so I treated it with WD to get the water off, and now I've laid them out on a towel here and sprayed them with brake cleaner. That will get the WD off. And you're wondering why I spray it with brake cleaner? Why wouldn't I just want them just to be oily? Well, see some of these still have a little topical rust on there. They have bare metal that's been exposed. I'm going to go ahead and put these on a piece of cardboard, give them a quick spray of some black paint just to keep them from getting rusty in the future. It may seem like a tedious minutia that's involved with you really don't need to do that if all you want to do is get it running, but I'm restoring a car and I want to get it done right, and I want it all to look nice when I'm done. I don't want to have to put rusty bolts back on onto a nicely new painted oil pan. So going through this little extra step. Now you could probably just buy new bolts. I looked it up on Moss. They're $14 for the entire set. $14, worth your time. But then you have to pay for probably twice that in shipping, or at least $20 anyway of shipping, and you have to wait for a week for it to get here. So it's all up to you. I like to do this kind of thing, so I'm going to go ahead and clean these bolts off, give them a quick spray, just so that they're sealed and they don't rust again. Before, after. Maybe just a little bit more this direction. There we go. Those look so much better. All right, so I got all the bolts in there hand tight. I put gasket dressing underneath to keep the gasket from sliding around, and I put a little bit across the top just to wet the gasket. That'll help it to get a good seal. But what I wanted to point out here is this gasket dressing on the cork. Oop. This stuff does not dry, and it won't dry. It'll stay flexible, and it'll give it the flexibility that it needs. Because when I'm going to tighten it down here on the top, I'm going to take up that gap. See that gap right there? I'm going to take up that gap, and it's going to compress. Well, when I put the front plate on, this plate that goes in right here, when I put that on, it's going to compress and take up the gap going that direction. So we need to use a dressing that is not going to be something that's going to dry, and that's why we use the gasket dressing instead of a silicone sealer. Because I'm not going to put the front cap on until I get my timing chain stuff together, and that'll be could be a week out. So using the dressing on the cork gasket is a lot better than using something that will dry and firm up like make a gasket or some sort of high temp silicone stuff. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and torque these down. If you're working from underneath the car as opposed to on an engine jack, I would recommend that you put the gasket dressing on your gasket on the oil pan so that it doesn't slide around, and you can put a couple of bolts in and put them up in there, and the gasket will be in place. It's really difficult to put a gasket on upside down because the gravity is always trying to pull it off. So put the gasket onto the oil pan with a little bit of dressing on there to make it sticky, and it makes it a lot easier to push it if you're working from underneath the car. Using my speed wrench because there's a lot of threads. I really highly recommend not using a power tool for this. These little bolts are not very big and they don't take a whole lot of torque. But having a speed wrench like this makes it really easy to get them down to a light amount of torque so you can get them all topped off. We'll come back later and tighten them by hand with a wrench. There's 18 of these little suckers. It takes a little while. Having one of these old speed wrenches is really helpful. You don't see these in most people's work in their toolbox. I have 2 of them. I don't know why. People getting rid of them, I guess. There you go. Now we'll just go back and torque those up to a snug but not tight manually. All right, there you go. Task complete. Got the oil pan on there. Got the end bearing cap seals in place, and again, love that color difference between the black and the gray. I love that. The next thing I'm going to be doing on here, whoops, got a little glue on me. So the next thing I'm going to be doing on here is putting on the front cap. This is the front cap right here. The front cap actually will secure this seal across 2 of these right across here. It seals across there. But what you'll notice on here is the paint mark, right? So I taped off this paint the same way I taped off the paint on the engine block, and the timing chain cover goes on top of that. So now here's the thing. Some of the timing chain cover bolts go through into the block, and some of the end plate bolts don't involve the timing chain cover. So there's 1, 2 there. You have the 3 bolts for the camshaft retaining bracket come across here, and those don't go into the block. See, they go past, and then a couple of these go in. There's one right there that goes into the block. So when you put this bracket on, when you put this plate on, there's a gasket that goes behind there. But there's only a few bolts that are shared between here and there. So again, I'm going to put dressing on that instead of silicone sealer, because I'm going to come back later after I've done the timing chain and put the rest of these bolts in. And I'll probably put a silicone sealer around the timing chain cover, because that'll be a one and done kind of thing. But in the case of this plate, I'll be using dressing on that one, just because I want to leave it flexible, because I'm going to put more bolts on later on. So it's a little tricky.